All right, let me tell you a story. On March 18th, 1965, Alexei Leonov was the first person to walk in space. There's like a whole host of issues that happened on that trip, but one of the most interesting things that happened is that after the first set of hiccups, after the spacewalk, Leonov comes back in, and of the few personal items he was allowed to bring on the trip, he brought a sketch pad and a pack of colored pencils, and he decided to draw his impression of what he saw on the spacewalk, an orbital sunrise. This is kind of like one of my favorite ideas in human existence, is the idea that humans can't not do art. So that's kind of the basis for this video, the idea that humans express themselves through art. In 2023, the U.S. Surgeon General, Dr. Vivek H. Murthy, released an advisory titled Our Epidemic of Loneliness and Isolation, and in it, he details the issue of loneliness in the country and lays out 6 pillars to combat loneliness, and more specifically, social disconnection. But loneliness isn't a new emotion, right? It's just been exacerbated by recent events like the social media boom, social issues involving work and play, and global issues like wars and pandemics. So you could assume that if loneliness is not a new emotion, and humans can't help but express themselves through art, there's already an ample amount of art that exists that deals with loneliness. So in this video, I'm going to be focusing on a few different pieces of art that deal with loneliness. So first, what is loneliness? Well, Webster's dictionary defines loneliness. No, I'm just kidding. But I do think that it's important to have kind of a solid definition for the purposes of this video of loneliness, because it's a subjective term. Before we get into interpreting art for a subjective term, we should probably kind of figure out what it means first. The Campaign to End Loneliness, which is a UK organization that claimed to be experts in loneliness since 2011, defines loneliness as a subjective, unwelcome feeling of lack or loss of companionship. It happens when there is a mismatch between the quantity and the quality of the social relationships that we have and those that we want. That's a pretty broad definition, and they do go into more detail on their website about where they drew that definition from, different kinds of loneliness, and the causes and effects that loneliness has in today's society. The Surgeon General's advisory groups feeling isolated, invisible, and insignificant into its definition of loneliness, and it also includes example statements like, if I disappear tomorrow, no one will even notice, or I have to shoulder all of life's burdens by myself. While the Campaign to End Loneliness's definition is apt, I personally prefer the Surgeon General's advisory's definition, just because I feel like it's easier as a human being to connect with it and to evaluate yourself based on it. I started this project by making a playlist of songs about loneliness. I record all the music for videos I make, and so I wanted to have a reference list of songs to draw from. On this short playlist, there are songs that are explicitly about loneliness, songs that suggest loneliness or isolation, songs that describe lonely situations, and even songs that have undertones of desperation. It was pretty interesting to sift through the music that I listened to when making this playlist. Some of the songs that I listen to when I'm feeling lonely didn't make the cut for this playlist, because even though they have an emotional significance to me, they aren't about loneliness, which I feel like, someone else can make a video essay about that. So music is the medium that I'm most familiar with, and I think it's a good segue into talking about short stories. I feel like the two mediums, while they're not necessarily related, have similar functions. Songs and short stories are short-form content that, while they do evoke and discuss thoughts, feelings, and ideas that their longer, more formal counterparts do, they are restricted by their compact nature. Songs and short stories are kind of the 15-second TikTok edit to longer, more formal forms of art's feature film, if you will. Alright. Okay, let's get into these short stories. So the first one I want to talk about is A Clean, Well-Lighted Place by Ernest Hemingway. I find this story to be a pretty apt showcase of how different people seek connection and deal with feeling lonely. The story begins at a cafe where two waiters are waiting to close up for the night, but they can't because they have a customer who's this kind of deaf old man. The old man keeps ordering drinks, and we kind of are able to eavesdrop on the waiter's discussion about him. We find out that even though he has material possessions, he's not satisfied, he's lonely, and he seeks an escape. Of course, the old man can't hear them, and he doesn't really say anything during the story, so we don't know how true this discussion is. But for the purposes of my interpretation of the story, it's true. The younger waiter is impatient to get home, and so he kicks the old man out of the cafe, and they close up. After closing the cafe, the older waiter tries to go to a bar, and after having a drink, ends up just going home and deciding to lay in bed until morning because he prefers clean, well-lighted places like the cafe he works in rather than unclean, poorly lit places like a bar. One of the most interesting bits of this story is how the older waiter who goes to the bar and then goes home is sympathetic towards the old man at the cafe. And he's not just sympathetic, but even mirrors the old man's actions, wanting to go to another place to seek connection before being forced to go home. Kind of one factor that lies under this short story is the importance of third places. These are spaces that aren't your home or work, your first or second space, that provide a place to connect for little to no cost. The Surgeon General's advisory lays out 6 pillars to advance social connection, and the first pillar is strengthening social infrastructure in local communities. While the advisory emphasizes connection in schools or workplaces, it also emphasizes promoting connection in third spaces like libraries or places of faith. Emphasizing connection in all of these spaces would make it easier for individuals seeking connection to find it, effectively creating more clean, well-lit places. The second short story that I want to talk about is Death by Landscape by Margaret Atwood. Death by Landscape focuses on Lois, a woman in the later years of her life who is haunted by memories from when she was a kid. The incident that she keeps coming back to is losing her best friend Lucy on a canoe trip at an all-girls summer camp that they attended in their preteen and teenage years. This story does a pretty good job of reflecting the relationship between isolation and processing trauma. While neither is directly related to the other, isolation can force an individual into processing trauma and exacerbate the feelings that come with that. Lois, even though she has forged relationships throughout her life, is forced to relive the experience of losing Lucy. And a big part of the story is the fact that she doesn't really know how to make sense of it. Even after reading it, I, the reader, want to believe that Lucy just kind of slipped into the woods and is like living a life in Montana, I don't know, somewhere, you know? I don't know, it's a really interesting story. All right, last one. This one's called The Handsomest Drowned Man in the World, and it's by Gabriel Garcia Marquez. Pretty much, a dead stranger washes up on the shore of an isolated village. As the men in the village kind of go around to neighboring villages to see if the man who washed up on the shore belongs to one of those villages, the women bring the dead man inside and clean him up. It's kind of a weird story. There's a lot of emphasis on how much physically bigger the dead man is than the inhabitants of the village. There's no bed that will fit him. And it's almost like, is this a supernatural entity? Who knows? But as the women clean him up, they also discover that they find him pretty attractive. It's kind of like an ethereal beauty, I guess, or supernatural beauty, if that makes sense, the way it's described in the story. But they sew him new clothes and even go as far as to assert that the man's name is Esteban without any evidence for that. And when the men come back from the neighboring villages, the women are relieved to find out that Esteban doesn't belong to any of those villages. So after they hold a funeral for Esteban, they drop him off a cliff, but they don't anchor him so that he can wash back up on the shore if he wishes to. All right, let's talk about parasocial relationships. I thought this was pretty interesting. I had already decided on doing this video about loneliness before I read this short story, and I'd also kind of never heard of parasocial relationships until more recently. So it's interesting to have an older piece of art that reflects newer ideas, if that makes sense. If you don't know, a parasocial relationship is a one-sided connection in which an individual imagines a personal bond with someone in the public eye. An individual being involved in a parasocial relationship can stem from escapism, social needs, or even just a frequent exposure to media figures. With changes in technology and the culture surrounding celebrity, it's only become easier to form these kind of one-sided relationships. I think it's interesting that the cultural changes that have led to the ease of development of these parasocial relationships go both ways. While regular people are interacting more with influencers and show hosts and celebrities, the people on the other side of the glass are encouraged to make themselves more accessible. There are TV shows about celebrities' personal lives. Day-in-the-life vlogs are popular in long and short form content on YouTube and TikTok. And it seems like the trend of getting closer and closer to celebrities' personal lives isn't gonna let up anytime soon. I mean, I opened my Spotify Wrapped yesterday and I had messages from my most listened to artists shot on like a front-facing camera thanking me for listening to their music, that kind of thing. The interesting thing about parasocial relationships is that they're not inherently unhealthy. While they can get out of hand if they start interfering with real-life relationships or well-being, they can also provide a sense of connection to individuals who are seeking that sense of connection. The Surgeon General's advisory talks about reforming digital environments, and there isn't really a lot said. It just says that we need to ensure that products don't make social connection worse, and that products do make social connection better. So, I don't think that the woman in the short story have a problematic parasocial relationship with the man who washed up on their shore. The relationship that they created with him may have even allowed them to process grief or the feelings that they were feeling about this event that just happened to them out of nowhere. Alright, so there you go. A little bit of loneliness and art for you. This was kind of a word salad of like tangentially related thoughts that I've had recently that I connected to these short stories for this project for my English class. But I think that the point that I want to get across here is that loneliness is a human emotion. Not only is it normal and human to feel lonely and think about loneliness, but it's also human to want to express that. Throughout human existence, we've found ways to express our feelings through art. And it's important to express or experience those emotions through whichever medium or level of formality you're comfortable with. Humans can't not do art, and it's part of what helps humans be humans. Sometimes it's good to create art, other times it's good to experience art that resonates with us, but it's always important to find healthy ways to express the emotions that you feel. Thanks for watching. This was a project for my English class, but it's cool. It's all good. It's all good. Yeah, like, comment, subscribe, that kind of thing. We'll see. I think I have a couple more videos coming out soonish, at least one. So we'll see.